in the news recently, we might have seen that Ralph Schumacher, the Formula One driver, and brother of Michael Schumacher, the very famous Formula One driver, also recently revealed that they are in a relationship with another man, and it's so exciting. When data isn't seen, people can be ignored, and I think that's why I'm a data nerd, and
yeah, for sure,
you know, why I do work in research, because I think everything should be based on evidence. And when you have scientific evidence to back up your claims, you can't be denied things.
This is Give It To Me Bi, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything from a bi plus perspective. I'm Chad Barnier.
And I'm Steve Spencer. Together, we're diving into the real stories, the challenges, and the celebrations of the bi plus community. We are here to learn together and, of course, to laugh together.
From personal journeys to cultural moments, we are here to amplify a bi plus point of view and spark conversations that matter.
So, whether you're bi, pan, queer, or just curious, join us as we explore the world of bi plus experiences.
Now, let us give it to you bi. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Chad.
How are you?
Yeah, good. Just having a whinge about waking up this early for my run, but the dopamine is worth it. I'm not sure how worth it is dipping into the cold waters of the winter Pacific Ocean when it's 5 degrees Celsius.
No, I could use some dopamine. My body is failing me at the moment. I could use some good vibes just to kind of get through. I'm really impressed that you're waking up that early. I have a toddler and I'm not waking up near that early. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm a puppy, so I get restless. I have to walk myself.
You are myself a puppy?
Out to pee.
Are you a puppy? Have you delved into the pup play?
I don't identify as a pup, but I do support the pup community. So to all of our pup listeners, woof.
Woof, woof, bark, pant.
Woof. I do say woof a lot, though. I say woof to... Actually, can I tell you something really interesting about when I came out? Please. So, in queer male lexicon, the word woof is used a lot, right? So, someone sends you a cute photo and you go, oh, woof. Yeah. Or it's become more generalized. So Celine Dion will do a really good performance woof. And I was really scared. When I started dating women, I was do I have to change my language? What do I do? And then I realized, hell no, you can woof whoever the hell you want. And, that's been really great. If a girl I've been dating hasn't necessarily been exposed to that language, they're like, did you just woof me? And I'm like,
woof at me?
It's a good thing.
I have a friend who isn't queer that I know, who knows they could come out in the future. And we were, I can't remember the story exactly, but they went to have a reaction or something and went to say whoa and oof at the same time. And they went, woof. It was a really low rumbly woof. And it in our circle of friends, it's it's less tied to queer communities and more to this one person who very gutturally said woof this one time.
Yeah, that's a very specific type. And it
was frightening. It's frightening enough that we reference it years, almost a decade later.
Yeah, I think if someone does that sort of a woof to you, you're about to engage in something very fun.
Yeah.
The food is about to be served.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. Steve, tell me, this week we're introducing a new part of our opening banter. Is what was a bi celebration? Was a bi highlight, a bylight of your week this week?
My bylight for the week. Oh yeah. So, a friend of mine who has been going on their own coming out journey over the last year, previously identified as gay, now identifies as bi, and is going through all those cycles that we all know. It's been so wonderful watching him grow, and for want of a better term, come to terms with it, because it's such a huge, not a change in himself, but a change in how he feels he'll be walking through the world. And that's sort of how I described it as well. But he's just accepted his first speaking gig at a bi event.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's fab.
And it just brings me back to my own memories of all the questions that he was asking me, will will I fit in there? Like all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, we've already printed your ID card out. Like you're with family. I love watching people grow into their own journeys. And like, I just moved house this week. So as you know, and that's why we're filming in my bedroom, because the rest of the house is a dump at the moment. So despite all the crap going on, his little smile and enjoyment just was my absolute byline.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I know.
Yes.
Chad, what was your byline of the week?
My byline of the week. Look, I mean, this week was a very exciting one for the podcast. We got together and we shot our official podcast photo assets photography, and it was just a fucking blast. Assets.
That's lingo.
I work in marketing.
Thirst traps. There are thirst traps.
That's so funny. I work in marketing, so assets is what I call like kind of any creative property. But I love the idea that I would call like photos of us assets. It's like, oh, this is a really positive spin. And so it was really beautiful to get to spend time with you and the photographer and your friend that came along with us. And it was really, really affirming. It's something that like, as a new dad, I don't get to go out too much. I mean, I say new dad, it's been 2 years, but I love spending time with my family, and that's always my priority. So getting to get out in the world, especially to get out with you. Actually, the last few social events I've been to have been with you, and it's really affirming.
And now you have me here all the time.
There we are. It's really affirming to kind of go out in the world, and specifically for bi reasons. And it's just kind of beautiful. And it was nice to just kind of be in that space and talk to our photographer about all the things that we were working on. And it was, he got the spiel. He got all of the talking points.
It was so funny. Okay. No one, please, listeners, do not invite Chad and I over for a dinner party, because we will not stop. We will fill your cup with so much bi information, but it was awesome. Awesome spending the day with you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And then it was really quite beautiful. I've find myself sometimes in certain circles not talking about being bi, because it's not really the topic of conversation, or we've got other shit to talk about. Maybe it's about being new parents, or maybe it's talking about families or other things. And getting those photos back from that session was really quite a celebration, and I really wanted to share them. And so I shared them with some friends and got to talk a little bit more openly than I usually do in a particular social setting. And it's bizarre to have a podcast where we talk about this so openly and so freely, and still find myself going, oh, okay, it kind of still gives me butterflies in some areas to talk about this topic.
Same. Like, we're both very openly bi. We both, roll around in fairly bi circles when we get the opportunity to. And even I, when I say like, oh, we've started a podcast, and they're like, what's the topic on? I still pause for half a second. Yeah. Just half a second. And it's not my own sort of like scared. Like, I'm not scared or anything, but I'm like, a lot of people still, I don't know where I'm going with that thought, but it is interesting.
No, I hear you. It's, I was reading a study just before, like, we understand the idea of, compulsive heterosexuality, but I was reading a study before about hegemonic monosexuality. Let me break that down a little bit, because it's a lot of big words. It's kind of like,
oh yeah.
You're good. But for the listeners at home, let me mansplain it for you. It's kind of like compulsive heterosexuality, but the idea is that like the world is these days quite comfortable with the idea of monosexuality. So the idea that you are either heterosexual or homosexual. People are very comfortable with those things these days. Maybe not to the same degree, but the second you add a new degree, a new something, a new flavor, to it, then a little bit of bi spice, then people
bi spice. Oh, we need to become rappers with the bi spice now.
That's my Spice Girls name. I'll be bi spice.
Okay, yeah.
You're the one that I want.
If you want to be my lover, you got to sleep with all of my genders friends. Yeah, like I'm sure that you experience this too. That like there's always this moment of hesitation of how will you take this, or what questions will you ask? Because like I've heard the gamut of all the questions. Which ones are you going to align with? Because that will kind of
help me figure out where to place you in the comfort of like, oh, okay, you're in this circle, not like maybe the inner circle, maybe the outer circle, but just based on your questions alone, I kind of understand how you understand bisexuality and maybe my experience of it.
Oh, it's that. And I know the question you're thinking about. I was interviewed, a really professional interview, and I think the second question in was, so, do you prefer men or do you prefer women? And I'm like, oh, we're just on different planets right now. That's not how we think. And that's a monosexual point of view. It's the comprehension that bi people have the capacity to be attracted to multiple genders. And for someone that doesn't have that, like, I can't understand how you could only be attracted to one gender. It's just like,
that's your experience, right?
Like everyone's hot. Go for it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of those things that like, because that's our experience, it feels so normal. And that's why I always do hold space for people who don't have that same experience, because if you don't have that experience, why would you assume any different?
Yeah.
However, it would be really nice for you to have that empathy for our community and therefore us with yours, etc. Yeah. One of the fun things I got from that photo shoot is you and I both were talking to our photographer about all the people that come out to us either publicly or privately because we are so vocal about bisexuality. Yeah. And this week I had a friend of my partner in conversation talk to me. How do I say this without being overly specific? They've been open to me about their sexuality journey. And it's just so lovely to be able to be that kind of lighthouse. We've spoke about that previously, the bi lighthouse for people, because it is so not talked about. The second that there is someone that you see as a potential safety or a lighthouse or a level of comfort about the topic, the identity, you'll see all these people come out of the woodwork. Oh, by the way, I've had these thoughts my whole life and I don't know who to talk about them with. My partner's uncomfortable. My friendship group's uncomfortable. It was really quite interesting that we both shared that with our photographer in our photo shoot this week.
Yeah. Oh, love you, Chad.
Love you.
Aloha, everyone. We are back to our lovely podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our banter so far, and we are going to move into just a little segment just to talk about some perspectives on current events in the media.
What have you got for us this week?
And there's always something. There's always, something that's really cool. There's always someone new coming out. There's always a new song with like a lyric that either explicitly like says bisexual. Like there's a song that came out recently with bisexual dynasty in it, and I lost my mind.
What song is this? Why do I not know it?
I'll find it for you. Damn,
Please.
Remind me to do research before on everything before podcasts.
Bisexual dynasty? That's
one of the lyrics. And I'm like, yeah.
Okay.
But in the news recently, we might have seen that Ralph Schumacher, the Formula One driver, and brother of Michael Schumacher, the very famous Formula One driver, also recently revealed that they are in a relationship with another man, and it's so exciting. So in Ralph's own words, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm in love, this is him, this is me, and didn't put a label to it. And I think, and I think that's wonderful. I am all about bi visibility, so I really encourage people, if they're safe to do so, and if they like to do so, I don't just call them labels, I just call them descriptions. It's like, we're not a can of tuna, we're just opening the lid and showing you what's inside.
Yeah, cool. I like that.
So, he just said, I'm in love with a man, which is awesome. Previously in a marriage to a woman for 14 years. And every single headline in the media says Ralph Schumacher comes out as gay.
Listen, I just Googled it as you're talking about it. I said, Ralph Schumacher, put that in, comes out as gay. Comes out as gay. Everything's gay. Yeah. And we've seen this before. This isn't new. The same with Rebel Wilson. Rebel Wilson started dating a woman. Lesbian. And listen, like, nothing against the gays and lesbians. We love the gays and lesbians.
No, we do.
But it is the default response. It's why we, like, Brokeback Mountain is known as a gay film. It's like these two men who are married to women start dating each other. Now it's a gay film. It's we see this narrative a lot.
And that's a simple thing we call bi-erasure. And we'll do an episode about that. But what bi-erasure is basically imagine if imagine if we only counted by single people. If we count people by the gender of the relationship they're in and assign their sexuality by that, there would be very few bi people in the world. And this entire episode is about have we given away what the episode's
haven't.
about?
No, but go for it. Tell us, what's the episode about?
Oh, no, I'm not going to yet. But we will be discussing... Wow, sorry, listeners. The bands are going along tonight. We will be discussing how the identification of bi people is just growing exponentially. And so that label is being used more and more and more and more. But back to Ralph Schumacher. So he didn't use a label. He just described his love. It's wonderful. Every single headline and conversation around it described him as gay. Now, one friend of his, and so this is where it gets a little bit complicated, and this is where I need to check myself and be like, am I jumping at shadows? But my number one rule here is to listen to the person. Don't listen to what other people say, because only you get to decide how the world gets to describe you. And Ralph decided to simply describe the love he has for his partner. And so we shouldn't make any assumptions about his sexuality. So I'm not assuming that he's bisexual. I can look at the facts that he had a wife of 14 years and now has a male partner. But one of his friends made an Instagram post saying he confessed his homosexuality to me. So, and then everyone said, oh, well, his friend said this, so it must be true. And Ralph still hasn't said anything about his sexuality. And that's
it's so interesting because I feel like one of the tricky things to reckon with this is we don't want to ascribe a label to someone that doesn't want to hold that label. Some people are not for labels at all. However, there is a reality that people within the queer community are very used to and very comfortable or very forward with using labels, and people outside of the queer community are less so.
Yes.
I have witnessed that, and this is obviously anecdotal, in my experience, people who may come from, let's say, straight communities into a more queer identification might use things like homosexual identity, as what Ralph's friend has, as a catch-all phrase for something that isn't straight, right? And I've also witnessed, and you could probably speak to this as well, people who come from more queer or homosexual communities, when they maybe transition to being bi or come into their truth as being bi, they're a little bit more intentional and specific about labeling it as such, because there's a clarification instead of like moving away from straight and moving into bi, which is interesting. Do you have any thoughts about like whether that might be true in this case?
Super interesting. Like, I mean, even the use of like our flag, right? So I often see bi people who may have recently come out and they've come from a former straight identification, and they'll wave the rainbow flag as a catch-all for the queer community. But as we've developed various specific flags for our communities, we sort of have our own ways of identifying ourselves. And of course, we have our lovely bi flag. Whereas people who are a bit more, for want of a better term, in the know about the queer community, they'll be flying the bi flag. And so I've said to a lot of people, I'm like, we have this flag. You can use this. The rainbow one isn't so descriptive. And they go, oh, I didn't even realize we had a bi flag, or, oh, I thought that I was included in the rainbow flag. I'm like, oh, you certainly are. But if you want to sort of signal your community, your identity, there is something here for you.
It's super fascinating. I really enjoy this talking point because it's something that I don't see spoken about that often. I see this kind of newfound comfort in people coming out later in life. I was talking to my partner recently about quite a few people that we listen to podcasts or subscribe to their content, particularly women, cisgender women who are leaving their partners, their male partners, and coming out later in life as queer of some sort.
Yes. Yeah.
And that may be a lesbian identity. It could be bisexual, it could just be queer, or it could just be, I'm just living life as me, which that's all those things are fine. That's fucking awesome. Love that. Live your life, live your journey.
Yeah.
But I am recognizing that there's this huge move in certain circles and certain demographics and ages away from this. We're talking about before that hegemonic monosexuality into a queer identification, but there is always this hesitation of, do I label it? Do I call it gay? Do I call it bisexual? Or do I say, I'm just doing me? I see I'm just doing me so often from people who have previously identified as straight or heterosexual.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is. It is. And I don't know, maybe over time, those people.
Is it fear?
I have a theory.
I feel like it's fear based.
I have a theory because bisexuality is so stigmatized in society. You know, even I used to say, like, after I came out, I'd say I was afraid of coming out because there are so many negative stereotypes about bi men. Why would I want to be associated with that?
Fair. Yeah. Okay.
But then when I came out, I realized, oh, it's bloody awesome. Yeah, there's, you know, some biphobia and stuff out there, but like, my God, it's so much better being out.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting. We talk about biphobia a bit, right? And people say what biphobia, etc. But there must be enough of it that people who discovering their bisexuality or their non-monosexuality have a fear of some sort, and I'm ascribing the word fear to it. It may not be that, but there is a hesitation of some sort to label it as such. And so there must be some kind of biphobia that exists outside of bisexual circles, that there is such a hesitation to say, yeah, actually, maybe I am bi.
Yeah, well, it's internalized biphobia. I mean, we understand very well internalized homophobia, the effects that internalized homophobia has on homosexual people. It can be deadly. It can very well be deadly. And it's the exact same for internalized biphobia. It's the exact same. But guess what? We have tons of research and understanding and counselors and therapists and funding for internalized homophobia. We do not have the same for internalized biphobia.
Yeah. And bring it on. Let's bring on that, some advocacy. Guys, let's get into those circles with medical practitioners. I've pushed back against my GP on certain topics about sexuality. But yeah, thank you for bringing that Ralph Schumacher piece. I did see that. It was lost in my dad brain, but interesting topic.
Yeah.
Love that.
So I learned sort of two things from that. Never label someone else's experience unless you know for sure. Like even his friend when she said, oh, he confessed his homosexuality. I experience homosexuality because in the technical term, I experience the attraction to people of the same gender as myself. You know, so homosexuality is part of the broad spectrum of my bisexuality. But to ascribe a label to it without the person saying it, not sure about that one. And I also learned that maybe I think about these things too much.
I don't think it's bad to do that. I think we have a podcast and we talk about these things because we think about all these things. We need an outlet for it. So I think that's fine. I think it's
totally. And our lovely listeners get to hear my little rants about it. But, this is part of what Give It To Me Bi is. This is our perspective on things. I will read that sort of a headline, see that, look at this man as his whole self, his whole experiences and go, why are they calling him gay? When most non-bi people might not think about that. So
look, I think especially it's important in particular circles, right? So Ralph Schumacher, Formula One, that's not a typically queer friendly community or queer friendly industry. A lot of sports aren't. We've seen that in the NFL. We've seen that in just last year, in the UFC, Jeff Molina came out as the first openly bisexual fighter. But that was off the back of an intimate video being leaked. And sometimes people who have a bisexual lived experience might not have the language to talk about those things. But if we have representation in these fields, in these arenas, these industries, hopefully people can start to be more comfortable just to being their whole selves. Like it's like, Steve, I long for a day that bisexuality is boring as fuck. Like, it shouldn't be interesting. People shouldn't have to have a podcast about it. But unfortunately, it is not accepted, and it's not the norm. It's not a lot of things that people need to learn about lived experiences of others. And hopefully through people coming out, people having podcasts, people talking about the topics that we're talking about, it becomes boring.
Yeah. Well, I think a good way for us to look at that and what the future might hold and whether or not bisexuality will become the norm and whether or not it will become boring, I think we should look at some figures and stats around the generational change of people identifying as bisexual, because I will tell you what, all right, I'm a data nerd.
Love it.
Love a number, love a good number, but bear with us on this one, listeners, because we are going to look at the Gallup poll's recent results around human sexuality in adults in the United States. And it is phenomenal. Well, let's break some of this down.
I thank you for taking that. I was pouring another glass of wine, and then my camera cut out. So this is fantastic. Yes, let's talk about it. I love the idea of how we talked about it previously, where we've come from, but where we're going, and how one may inform the other. So let's jump in, shall we?
Let's do it.
So welcome back. We are going to be talking about, on this episode specifically, the theme is the Gallup poll. The Gallup poll is a poll that we've referenced in previous episodes. Steve and I have talked about the data and the insights from these polls in our advocacy and activism work. It is one of the largest kind of poll surveys of queer identifying folks. And it reveals a lot of really interesting data about our communities, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, throughout the queer community, how much of the population we make up, how much all of our different communities make up in the population, and some insights from that as well. I think it's really interesting to dissect those things. One of the biggest findings, one of the biggest things that we pull from this survey is the generational data as well. We're really excited to talk about some of the generational insights from the Gallup poll. Now, there's been a few of these over the years. We've previously referenced the 2023 Gallup poll. One was released this year in March 2024. We are recording, obviously, in August 2024. Steve,
yes,
take it away. Talk us through the Gallup poll.
Yeah, the Gallup poll is a study conducted in the United States. It's able to be generalized across the whole population. So it's the most reliable data set that we've got. Here in Australia, we don't have national data on the numbers of LGBTIQ plus people.
Tisk. Can I just say tisk?
Come on, Aussies. We can campaign the Australian Bureau of Statistics to include questions about sexuality identification in the census, and that would be very, very good news for us, so that we would have
It's insane that it hasn't happened yet. The ABS has been around for decades.
Yes.
Where are we? What year is it?
I know. We can thank our previous Conservative governments for keeping those questions out. Yes, because when data isn't seen, people can be ignored. And I think that's why I'm a data nerd, and
yeah, for sure,
why I do work in research, because I think everything should be based on evidence. And when you have scientific evidence to back up your claims, you can't be denied things.
So it's interesting. I come from like a marketing background, right? And I've come across over the years this saying, what's measured is managed. Right. And I know a lot of health people are into that kind of phrase as well. If I measure my macros, I typically have a good idea of what's going in and out of my body. And it's not necessarily a guide. It's not to say you should do this, but just let's get a baseline. Let's get an understanding of what is. And based on what is, we can go forward with what should be, or how do we support what is.
So, all right, Chad, I'm going to get you to start us off. Tell us what the general LGBTQ plus, this is their language, LGBTQ plus identification is, the rate it's going up, and then could you tell me perhaps why that rate is going up?
Yeah, cool. So,
hint.
Great. So, in the Gallup poll, the LGBTQ plus identification in the US is now 7.6%, which is huge. Absolutely huge. Now, we've spoken previously that like some communities might use 7.6% as this is their percentage of the makeup of the population, but this is queer identifying people. So LGBTQ plus. Now, that covers a few different things. So in this study, let me just double check. That is, they identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and other LGBTQ+, right? So the other is kind of a catch-all. So it's not a little bit non-specific.
Yeah, which often includes people under the bi+ umbrella, people that are multigender attracted, very often.
Absolutely. And I've witnessed in studies and data points as well that like asexual might be identified separately, but asexual could be lesbian, could be gay, could be bisexual, could be a number of things.
A lot of research separates pansexual out as well, or queer. And in the bi+ community, we include pansexual and queer under the bi+ umbrella. So
yeah, it was interesting a few years ago. Yeah. The Private Lives 3 study, and sorry to go on a tangent, but it was the first study I ever saw separate pansexual as their own sexuality. And I was, as someone who identifies as bisexual and pansexual and also queer, I was amazed. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm being seen in a study. This is fantastic. So the Gallup poll has been running for now almost 15 years, right? So in 2012, they identified that there was 3.5% of the general US population identified as LGBTQ+, right? So over the years, we've seen a bit of a jump. And specifically between 2020 and 2021, I wonder what happened in 2020. There has been a bit of a jump. Yeah, the world ended. People thought maybe I should live my true self. That's a personal opinion. But in 2023, is 2024 study is of 2023, 7.6%. So we've seen a doubling, larger than a doubling of queer representation in the general population. Huge. So that's a huge rate of growth, right? Absolutely. And the cool thing about this Gallup study is they've got a lot of data points, right? They've got not just identification, they've also got age, they've got generation and how that applies to, say, boomers, Gen X, millennials, what's the next one? Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Actually, they don't have Gen Alpha in here.
They don't have Gen Alpha yet. Yeah.
No.
I've got my own theories about that. 5-6 years later.
So the cool thing about this study is it's not just about self-identification, about are you lesbian, gay, bisexual, etc. It's actually got really cool generational insights as well. So we're talking silent generation, which is born 1945 or earlier. Holy crap, we have that data. That's insane. Baby boomers born 1946 to 1964. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Millennials, 1981 to 96. Raise your hand if you're a millennial. That's me. Hey. And Generation Z, 97 to 2012. So we've got some really cool generational insights as well.
Yep.
Steve, run us through any kind of generational insights that you're seeing in this data.
So the rates across all sexuality identifications increase across the generations. But what really interests me is just how different it is between the identifications. Now, it's not just sexuality identification. We're talking about gender identification as well, because transgender people are included in this data. But we're just going to talk about sexuality here. Now, before I go into this, I like to use an analogy to explain to people. Because, you'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, we're, all this woke stuff is turning people queer. And it's like, no. We're not turning people queer. We're simply revealing the true nature of humanity.
What's the TikTok sound? Turn the freaking frogs gay? Turn the freaking frogs gay.
we're turning the frog gay and the unicorns bi. Yeah. I'm a self-identified unicorn, so
I love that. I have a unicorn tattoo. Did you know that?
Really? You got a tattoo of me on you?
I do. It's just you.
Oh, Chad, that's so nice of you. And so, but what this data tells us is we're just revealing the true incidence of sexuality. And so the analogy I use, I look at data about left-handedness. And so, what did they used to do to left-handed people? They'd punish them. Being left-handed was stigmatized, just like being queer has been stigmatized.
And in bizarrely similar ways. If you are left-handed, you are of the devil, is what they would say. And if you are queer, you are apparently also of the devil. And some people celebrate that, but it is a similar stigmatization.
Yeah, not stigmatism.
No, not stigmatism.
Who said that on Drag Race?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So in the early 1900s, roughly 3% of adults were left-handed. Once they stopped whipping people for being left-handed, massive rise, settled in the 1960s at about 14%. So it went from 3% to 14%, stayed at 14%. We now know how many left-handed people there are. It's 14%. Now, what this generational data does, it shows us the same sort of thing. We're trying to figure out basically how many queer people are there. And so what the generational changes show us, let's compare gay and bisexual. Silent generation, pre-1945, 0.4%. Goes up to 0.9% for baby boomers. Then it actually settles down between Generation X and millennials. It sits at 1.3 and then 1.6. And then there's another small jump up to 2.6%. So we're seeing a big rise and then a general settling of the number as we're seeing homosexuality be destigmatized, which started around the mid-20th century. We're sort of seeing those numbers stabilize a bit. And so we roughly know how many gay people there are.
And I might say really quickly, jump in. If you, obviously, a podcast is an audio format. However, we are filming video. And so we will include visuals of some of this data representation. I believe Spotify, you can now look at the visuals, and on YouTube, if you really want to see the data and the spreadsheet, we're going to be showing this as well. So, if you want to see the rise, feel free to jump over to those platforms.
Yeah. So, for gay people, it's a roughly rising line. All right, let's look at bisexuals. Silent generation, it is 0.1%.
Before that, can we do the lesbian community?
We can, definitely.
Because it's similar, but a little bit more dramatic than the gay identification.
Yes. So, again, we'll just go from generation to generation. I won't go through them all. 0.2 to 0.7, sits at 0.7, bit of a jump to 1.3, and then quite a large jump to 3% of all adults identifying as lesbian. Now, that's of all adults. So, it makes it a bit trickier because they don't separated out by gender. And I have seen some data sets where there are male identifying lesbians. Lesbian identifying men.
Mm-hmm. I'm intrigued. Sure.
I'm
intrigued.
I've seen data sets of this.
I'm pondering. Okay.
Bit of background information. I do some work in sexual health research, and so I see all sorts of interesting data come across my desk. So for Generation Z, currently 2.6% of them identify as gay, 3% of them identify as lesbian. So homosexuals identify roughly 5.6%. Let's look at bisexuals. I'm just going to go through the numbers because they're just really fun to say out loud.
Yes.
0.1, 0.6, 1.9, 5.9, 15.3.
Okay,
generation.
let's pause for a second.
No, I'm not letting you pause me. I'm not letting you pause me because I want to say it is tripling per generation. The number of people identifying as bi is tripling.
That's insane.
It's insane.
That's wild. Okay. Let's, okay. I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to silent generation, 0.1% identify as bisexual. It's nothing. It's a whisper. It's a cat's whisker, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was cute. Baby boomers, 0.6, right? Now we know between those two generations, there's a huge re-understanding of how people turn up in the world. So there's an expected lift, but that's 6 times. That's huge. Between baby boomers generation X, it goes from 0.6 to 1.9, 3 times. No other sexual identification does that. The lesbian identification stays the same, and the gay identification jumps a little bit by half, but we've tripled. Then between Generation X and millennials, we've tripled again. 1.9% to 5.9%. That's nuts. And then, okay, so we think millennials are fucking woke, right? Who are these crazy sexual people?
Bi, right?
Maybe it's the Rolling Stones article. Holy shit. We introduced the world to bisexuals. They all came out. But now we're seeing with Generation Z, Gen Z, it's gone to 15.3%. That's unheard of numbers. That is so far and above any other identification in any generation by a factor of, is it 10%? The closest being our own identification in the millennial generation. That's wild.
And in Gen Z, the wokest, why do we keep saying woke? I hate that word. Lesbians and gay together make up 5.6%. Compare that to the 15.3% of bisexuals. And when I sleep well at night, no matter what has happened to me during that day, no matter what mean comment someone has said, because I just go, the world is about to become extremely bisexual. Because Gen Z is coming through. And they're not.
Is it about to become, or has it always been, and we've just been fucking people around?
And this is what I'm saying. These, I say to people, being bisexual feels like being from the future, but living in the wrong time.
I love that. I hate that.
Because we are experiencing something. Our sexuality is far, far more common than society thinks it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And we are experiencing in real time something that I think in the future will become normal, because if we keep tripling the way that the rate is tripling, Generation Alpha may see up to 50% of all adults identifying as bisexual.
Now, Steve, I do have to say, I have reservations, right? I am very reserved in saying that the old adage of everyone's a little bit bi. I used to think, oh yeah, of course everyone's a little bit bi. Everyone's bi. You just somewhere on the spectrum. As a young, naive person, however, as someone who really prioritizes respecting other people's experiences, lived experiences, and their identification, I do not come from that point of view, right? So I am. Let's be real. If we triple the next generation, it's impossible to triple in the next generation, right? You can't go from 15 to 47 and then all the way up to
that time,
150.
We're becoming interdimensional by that time, so we'll be able to get to the 150%.
Yeah, so
you gotta think outside. You're so close-minded, Chad.
Generation Bravo, we're entering the Marvel Cinematic Universe of bisexuality. That's fantastic. Because, so going back to your analogy of left-handedness, I see that there will be a leveling out, right? I see that this data represents a more realistic view of what has always been.
Exactly.
But with a new language, a new lexicon, and an understanding of, oh, maybe I am something else than I expected I was. And perhaps if I was in the silent generation, I might have identified by the partner I was with at the time, etc., or the person my parents expected me to be with. So I do see a leveling out. I don't know what the number is. It's impossible to know. However, it is exciting to see people recognizing who they are. That's really cool. And not taking up space of other people. Like if we see that the number has jumped year to year of the total queer representation. So what that looks like to me is some people who were previously identifying as heterosexual or straight, recognizing a queer identification within themselves, and a few people maybe coming from lesbian, gay communities going, okay, maybe there's something else here.
I think so. And I think the people who currently or previously identified as lesbian or gay, I think the numbers of them starting to identify as bi is also increasing. And that's not something that's talked about very often. That's my experience. I previously identified as gay because, that's what my therapist told me. You're attracted to boys, you have to be gay.
It's super interesting. It is not the normal narrative that we are sold, that you are straight and you are bi, or you transition to bi, or maybe bi is a stepping stone to gay, right? I love that.
Gay was a stepping stone to bi for me, so we can throw that
exactly.
I love it when people say that, like, bi is just a stepping stone. I'm like, well, explain me.
Well, I love that we have two different perspectives on this podcast, right? I mean, I never really identified as straight. I've kind of, for the longest time, as I've been sexual or sexual identifying, it's been bisexual or a version of before I had the lexicon. But I love I love that you are so vocal, so visible, and your journey is forgive me if this is the wrong phrase, a typical version of coming out as bisexual.
Mm. Yeah, it's atypical in terms of its discussion in society.
Yes, thank you.
But being a bi man within the queer community, or even more specifically within, I'm somewhat in the gay community, living in central Sydney, all that jazz, especially, I just have so many gay identifying men coming out to me privately that they're bisexual.
Yeah, thank you for the correction. I feel like it is atypical in the narrative, but it's not atypical in the experience. There are a lot of gay identifying people who have attraction to women, to have attraction to people outside of their same gender, and it could be any gender. Yeah, thank you for the correction. I appreciate that.
Now we're going off track now.
Thank you. Yes. So one of
we
the
were
things
talking about Formula One. So who are you? Who do you think's going to win that? Oh, crap.
So one of the things that are really interesting about the Gallup study is the breakdown of gender, right? We've talked about this previously, and we'll talk about it a lot more, is that it is far more common for women to come out as a queer identification. There is still a huge stigma around men identifying as queer, but particularly bisexual. And I want to discuss maybe after this our hypotheses as to why, because this survey doesn't speak to that. But, and we'll show this on the screen again for those who want a visual. For the total LGBTQ plus identification, 8.5% are women, 4.7% are men. So obviously this survey doesn't capture folks outside of that gender binary, and apologies, not a part of that study, but for the purpose of this conversation, that is almost a doubling. However, when we get down to a bisexual identification, obviously there's a differentiation between lesbian and gay. Obviously, lesbian people.
But those numbers are roughly the same. That entire difference between that 8.5 and that 4.7 is found in bisexuality.
Yes. So in the bisexual identification, women are identifying 5.7%. And I know it's hard to hear numbers in an audio format. I struggle with that. My ADHD goes rampant. Men identify with bisexual identification 2.1%. So it is more than a double. It is almost a triple. So it's like a 2.5.
I say triple. I shorthanded to triple because
shorthanded to triple. But isn't that insane? So I would like, Steve, let's hypothesize for a moment, why are men finding it harder to come out as bisexual? Or maybe that's the wrong view to take. Do we just have 3 times less bisexual men than women? Or do you think there is stigmatization that makes it harder to come out?
I'm going to data nerd it for a quick sec. Just with that Gen Z roughly 15% number, if we saw the same amount of bi men identifying as bi women, that number of Gen Zs identifying as bi would be closer to 20%. That would be 1 in 5 of all adults identifying as bi. So I've always been interested, and to be honest with you, sort of saddened to see this number, because it's the same in across generations, is that there have always been more bi women out than bi men. And there could be a number of different reasons why. Now, I'm a bi man. I can only speak to my own experiences, but from experiences that I hear from other people, especially bi women, or rather what I see in society, there's a reason why the hashtag bi men exists, because bisexuality in men is literally not believed. I say for bi women, they are accepted to exist, but that for sure does not mean that bi women don't face all sorts of horrendous discrimination and issues in society.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. It is definitely more readily acknowledged, but accepted. I would say. Yeah, to hesitate to say the word accepted, I think there's a lot of fetishization around bisexual women, right? It's like, oh, you're bi, let's have a threesome, you and a chick and me, the man, right? There's a lot of fetishization and potentially abusive relationships that surround that.
For sure, so many issues that bi women face.
Yeah,
but with bi men, we're just laughed at and just said no immediately. So we don't get to the fetishization stage, and I hope we never do. I hope that fetishization is wiped off the face of this planet.
Well, I hope fetishization isn't part of the fucking journey, the pipeline to acceptance.
Yeah,
I guess we'll see.
Yeah, but I guess, I mean, this is sort of why we do what we do. We're two bi guys. Shout out to an incredible podcast, the Two Bi Guys podcast. You know, we're showing that it's normal.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have to show that it's normal says a lot about like what we're going through in society.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack, right? There's such a misunderstanding of male bisexuality. There is support groups for female partners of male bisexuals, which is itself an interesting topic to unpack.
If you know, you know.
There is some pretty horrific sexual health stigma and mythologies around bisexual, sexually active men. I would really like to point to the work of a researcher, Brian Feinstein, has done really fantastic studies on bi-negativity, on the bi-male experience, and discrimination, internalized kind of biphobia. Brian Feinstein has done several studies. It's one of those things when I started to really dig deep into kind of the scientific space and research space about bisexuality, this name popped up maybe 10x every other name in the space. And there are some really fantastic studies as to why men have really quite a challenging time accepting their sexuality as bi men, and all the different connotations of what that lived experience might mean, all the different ways that they are and are not accepted by differing communities. Obviously, we've spoken about before, and we'll continue to speak about double-sided discrimination within straight and homosexual communities. And so, yeah, if anyone is interested, I would definitely recommend looking up the work of Brian Feinstein, or Feinstein, I'm pretty sure that's the pronunciation, does some really fantastic work onto why bisexual men might face some particular challenges to coming out and owning their sexuality in this space.
Yeah. And so we can see in the data that homosexuality is fairly similar between genders, that human sexuality does somewhat disperse itself kind of equally between genders. So there's no, like, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there are just societal reasons why there are less bi men identifying as bi, why the numbers say there are less bi men. In reality, there are not less bi men. So, and it is just it is the biggest hole in our data. It's the bit, don't laugh, Chad. It's the,
you do your hand movement saying the biggest hole. I'm so sorry.
It's the biggest hole in our services, in our resource allocation. Yeah, there you go. You're putting a serious face on now. It's the biggest hole in all things.
Yeah.
We put so many resources and so much time in supporting queer people, and dare I say, it is the bi men that lose out the most across all data sets. Across mental health, sexual health. Bi men are always at the very bottom of every list. It's at the bottom of this list. The people who are least likely to be out are bisexual men.
Yeah. I will challenge that a little bit, right? Ooh. I totally recognize that compared to lesbian and gay counterparts, that bisexual men are absolutely less represented and have quite a few differentiations when it comes to things like mental health. The disparities between mental health well-being is alarming, and things like substance abuse, etc. one area where I will highlight is bisexual women have alarming rates of intimate partner violence.
Thank you. Yes.
And domestic violence.
Big time.
It's quite alarming. It's scary, the rates of intimate partner violence for bisexual women. And so I will just caveat what you said with that. But yeah, absolutely. It's when you don't count. This is why we do what we do. Just by counting and just by putting your hand up and saying, this is who I am, this is all the ways I identify, this is all the ways that I am and I exist, we get to see data about the reality of life, and we get to go, okay, I see that need, I see that need, I see that need, and we start to paint a picture of where resources are needed and where work is needed.
Yeah,
not putting your hand up, and this is kind of what we're coming a little bit full circle. What we're saying at the beginning of this episode of people coming out and saying, I don't need to label it, and look, I get it. In a perfect world, you really shouldn't have to label your sexuality. In a perfect world, I can just date whoever the fuck I want to date, and that is who I am. However, the reality is we lack resources. We lack funding. We lack attention and prioritization by different services. By saying, hi, I am Chad, I am Steve, I identify thusly, then different services get to see, wow, there's a priority here and there's a need here. We might need to divert resources to this need.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, we often don't know what we don't have. So as someone who has experienced gay services, who has experienced services that are specifically for gay men, spaces that are specifically for gay men, there's just such extraordinary funding and support available there. And when I try and find any support as a bi man, it's just not there. And so like let's look at, say, for the example, a queer mental health service. The experiences of bi people are so unique. You need someone who has had the experience, who understands multi-gender attraction. As we said earlier on this podcast, monosexuals have their own worldview, their own viewpoint, their own experiences. And so when you're trying to apply the same principles under the banner of queer, say in the mental health space, and applying it from, a monosexual or gay or lesbian view and trying to apply that to bi people, it just often doesn't work out. And that again shows in the data of our poor mental health outcomes.
I mean, look, I will talk about a personal experience a few years ago. I was looking for a therapist. I was looking for specifically someone who understood the bi experience, and I couldn't find one. I went to a few sessions with some people, and just the language and the way they kind of framed bisexuality or sexuality in general really made me feel uncomfortable about sharing my story and my experiences, just kind of knowing that, like, oh, you're not actually going to give me recommendations or feedback that perhaps is specific for me. So I reached out to community, as is probably the right thing to do, right? It's like, hey, other bi folks, who else is out there? And one name came up consistently. There's someone down in Melbourne, and they were booked out for fucking 18 months because they are kind of the only publicly available bisexual themselves identifying therapist, psychologist, who was kind of speaking to those talking points. Yeah. And so this is another reason why it's like, hey, put your hand up, say who you are, like, be available. Like, again, like we said in the last episode, if it doesn't serve you or you don't have the capacity to be an advocate or whatever, sure, that's fine. However, if you are a psychologist, psychiatrist, a therapist, or whatever, and identify with the community, wow, what a resource you could be for everyone else in that community. And fuck, apparently you'll be booked out for 18 months.
Yeah. But, and people with a lived experience, you don't necessarily have to have had a lived experience to be able to deliver high quality services to someone, at all.
Absolutely.
But you do have to be well educated on it. And there's just that misconception that what applies to gay people or lesbian people applies to bi people. And so the books that you read on homosexuality, well, we can just transfer that stuff across. And that's not the case.
Totally.
Yeah, but
I was misidentified on my psych eval form. I asked for a mental health plan from my GP, and they identified me as straight, partner supportive is what they called it. And because I was deep in I've just joined the bi advocacy community, I made a point to call them up and say, please change that to bisexual.
Oh, God.
And I was met with a question, but why? That doesn't matter. I was like, oh. But I mean, and in that context, it may or may not have mattered, but it was important to me, and so I made a point to have them update it. It cost me $150 to do so.
It does matter. It does matter. We matter. Your sexuality is who you are all day, every single day, and that needs to be reflected. So I'm looking back at the Gallup data, and yes, I can confirm that 0.1% of the men on this poll do identify as lesbian. And yeah, just back to my lesbian identifying men comment. Could be a quirk in the data.
It could be, or I think perhaps it is under 0.1%. It is a negligible amount, but you can't represent it as zero, perhaps.
Or, hey, listeners, if you are a lesbian identifying man, please reach out to us. I'd actually be really, I could definitely do something. I could definitely.
This is a bisexual podcast, but if you're a male lesbian, call in and let's have a chat.
Yeah. No, I'm being serious.
No, I am too. Let's hear it. Well, listen, this is data that we find super fascinating. We've talked about for a long time now. There are some interesting quirks of this data and different things that we've spoken about briefly on the podcast so far of like, why though? So like, why are women more comfortable or more represented in bisexual identification? Why are Gen Z coming out more as bisexual? Like, there are so many things that we have presumptions about that might not be truth. It is our assumption. Maybe it's just, this is just how it's always been. Now we just have the language for it, which is completely possible. However, it could be something completely different. It could be any number of things. Same thing with female.
Same thing with turning the frogs gay, like the chemicals in the water, or
turn the freaking frogs gay. Yeah, gender disparities, prominence of bisexuality, generation shifts. There's so many different things that we have an idea about, but we don't have a definite understanding about. And that's why we will say, and we'll continue to say, and that's going to be my new favorite phrase in the podcast, we need funding, we need research, we need support from organizations to look into these different areas.
No, Chad, I just found some really interesting information on this point about the huge growth in bisexuality. Academy Award nominated action adventure film The Mummy was released in 1999. Now, if we line up, this is very serious, Chad. So The Mummy, featuring Absolute Thoughts, Rachel Weisz and Brendan Fraser, was released in 1999, and that matches up with this huge explosion of bisexuality. So
that's hilarious.
I think
I've always known of this meme that The Mummy is the reason so many people come out as bi. I love that it was actually your reason. Is that right? Is it your reason of coming out as bi?
I have many reasons.
Your awakening.
My awakening, yeah.
I told some non-queer friends this week that The Mummy, because we're looking for something to watch, like, we should watch The Mummy, the bi film of the 2000s. They're like, what do you mean the bi film? I was like, girl, you wait and see.
Yeah. Oh, woof.
Woof. Oh my gosh.
That whole cast, woof.
Yeah, fantastic film. Love that film. I might go watch it right now. There's so many questions to ask about this data. That's one of the things that you will find we talk about a lot is like, there's really interesting science, really interesting studies and surveys out about bisexuality and sexuality in general. However, what questions can we ask about this data and what is missing, what is apparent, and how do we unpack all of these things? Because it is just fascinating, right? It is. It's asking questions of our own experience that like, wow, that's always been the way, but no one's ever like put a question to it before. No one's ever kind of identified what that is. Like, I would be interested in how many people came out as bisexual because of The Mummy versus because of Green Day.
Oh yeah. Another woof. And like something else just randomly interesting that I find. I had someone, so I do research in bisexual sexual health.
Mm-hmm.
Say that 10 times really fast.
Bisexual sexual health, yes.
And I remember I did a presentation on it to some very important people. Mm-hmm. And one of the responses was, oh, we're sort of moving away from labels and sort of talking about parts. And this came from a gay man. And I sort of went, well, no, labels are actually, there's a certain narrative in the queer community. Even that word queer is starting to replace other identities. A lot of people are sort of generalizing, using less specific language about their identity to use sort of more community language. Like, I identify as sort of queer. I'm in the queer community, but I'll always say I'm bi. And I just find it really
interesting.
And so I find it interesting to look at this data that, that narrative about we're moving away from labels, that's a non-starter, because this data shows us very clearly that people are using labels more than ever. Than ever.
It is really interesting. I think,
and again, labels is not even a word. It's identification as a description.
I find that interesting because there is some validity in moving away from labels, right? We've talked about that earlier in this episode. But like, in a perfect world, fuck labels. What are we doing with the labels? However, we're not in a perfect world.
No.
And so we're currently not counting everyone. And by moving away from labels, potentially we're going from 1 to 100 without stopping at 1 through 100. Exactly. And that could really miss out on a lot of lived experience and not count the people that need to be counted. And same thing, even with this Gallup poll, it's pretty limited. Like, it shows a lot of insight, but it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and other, right? One, transgender isn't a sexuality. It is a gender identification. And it's more of a gender experience than a gender identification, right? Because you could be trans, non-binary, trans, masc, trans, femme. It could be a number of things. So that itself is imperfect. But also, bisexual, is that a catch-all for pansexual, for queer? Like, it's imperfect data. And so when we start saying, oh, we're moving away from labels, it's like, do we need to kind of follow the order of operations before we move away from labels completely? Maybe we need to start counting some people before we stop counting them entirely.
Yeah. Like, some people are living in a post-label world. And I think those people are maybe parts of the communities that experienced liberation earlier, that have far more established existences.
Or have a fear of coming out.
Yeah.
I know a few people who bisexual in experience, but have a fear of identification because of their lived experience and the people in their world.
For sure.
Sorry, that's got personal a little bit.
Oh, that's okay. Oof. Tell me how you really feel, Chad.
Woof.
No, that wasn't a woof. That was an oof. Oof. And never make those two mistakes. Oh my God.
Twin cross.
So someone sends me a nude and I go oof instead of woof and just offend them.
That's great.
But we're going way off on a tangent here. But
love it.
Yeah, we get actually going back to this data. We can see, there was a point where there were more homosexual identifying people than bi people, and then we jumped ahead. Gay liberation started a lot earlier. I'm not even sure if we've had our bi liberation moment. I think it's coming, or we're on the cusp of it. I hope we get it. I hope we sort of get that moment. I don't know what it looks like. That make it interesting.
It's interesting because like bi liberation has always been a part of gay liberation because it's been a catch-all term. However, I mean, I look at our trans brothers, sisters, and others that like being liberated comes with a lot of hatred. Right? Like, I see so many of my trans friends really having quite a hard time at the moment because of how scapegoaty and how othered they're made to feel. Because it just seems to be the zeitgeist at the moment. And it could be potentially the bisexual revolution of the future. And I mean, you and I are here for it. I know that we are, and we can take it. We're out and proud and banging the drum, but yeah, it'd be nice by liberation.
Yeah, it of course comes with its costs. It's awful costs. But the sort of that growth of the community, its place within society, it's normalization, for want of a better term, because gay people still face so much stigma and discrimination in society. There's sort of become like a sort of a broader consensus around monosexuality as at least acknowledged existences. And like we said earlier, bi people are still sort of fighting for their existence. But I'll tell you who isn't. The Gen Z, the kids, they are the future.
The kids will be all right. The kids will be all right.
Got it, and they help me sleep at night. The Gen Z.
I see these
adults,
kids on TikTok,
please,
babe.
actually, you know what? Actually,
they seem to just be so comfortable.
The Gen Z.
Well, listen, your internet broke up, so I didn't catch it.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, we're editing that out. I'll say Gen Z have got it. They are the future. They make me so hopeful. That is what I get from this data. That these numbers bring me hope, because the people coming after you and me, Chad, we're going to get old. We're going to die one day.
Oh my gosh, we are getting grey hairs.
We're already getting old.
I noticed that in our photo shoot.
Oh no. Oh yeah. I managed to hide my receding hairline pretty well. You know, the world is going to be, I think it's going to be easier for them. Not easy. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But
new challenges. That's what I want. I want, like, let's stop talking about, do bi people exist? I'm over bi 101. Let's talk bi 102, bi 103, 4, 5. Like, I'm so excited for this new generation. They are fucking incredible. I see them on TikTok. I see them talking about sexuality and gender. Yeah, on the TikTok. Yeah. Listen, I have a TikTok account, you boomer.
Elder millennial.
Well, maybe I'm a younger millennial. We're the same age though. You're only a month older than me, and I feel hipper to it. But the kids on TikTok, there is like a gender and a sexuality enlightenment that seems to be prevalent amongst this younger generation of like, wait, if I fuck with this gender thing or don't fuck with this gender thing, is a non-monosexual identification even a thing? Like, what is gender? What is sexuality? I like who I like. And it's like, fuck yeah, bring on the pansexual babies. I love it. Like, bring it on.
Well, I've said this to people. Trans people gave the world the gift of freeing ourselves from the rigid expectations around gender, and bisexual people offer the world the gift of freedom from the rigid expectations around sexuality. We offer freedom.
Yep. I wholeheartedly, with my full chest, believe in that. Yeah.
Full-throated.
Oh, babe.
So we talked about big holes, full throats. Well,
Listen.
To our listeners, it's getting to 9 p.m, so it's now entering. it's now Give It To Me by After Dark.
After Dark. Oh my god, this is the Patreon segment. Girl, bring it on. Love that. I've had a decent amount of wine throughout this episode. After Dark, I'm into it.
Yeah.
This is great. Well, listen, the call to action. I feel like I love that what we do on this podcast is a call to arms, and it is part of our DNA. We bang the drum, as we say. I feel like I would probably challenge people when you see a survey, when you see a study, put your hand up, be counted, right? The data matters. It's scientific, right? Like, science exists because it is something that's measurable. And if we can measure your experience, you listening in your car, listening while you vacuum the house, listening while you do your chores or at the gym, if we can measure your experience, then our community can be full, it can be whole, and we can really recognize you and your experience. That is wonderful. We want you to be counted. Like, I fucking sign to every survey. People are sick of me being counted. Well, I want you to be counted. It's a beautiful thing to say, yeah, look, this is my experience and I want you to see me for who I am. So maybe that's the call to action for this week is when you see an ad, when you see someone share it on Instagram or TikTok of here's a thing, here's a survey that's going around, sign up, be counted for who you are, your lived experience. What do you reckon, Steve? What's your call to action for this week?
No, I'm just going to second that one and just remind the listeners, it doesn't matter if you've got a wife or a husband or if you've never done anything with another gender or the same gender. It's about how you feel. Don't do what Chad's doctor did and say, it doesn't matter here. You matter everywhere you go. You matter everywhere you go. And so are you bi enough? Are you bi enough to tick by on that survey? If you have to ask yourself that question, yes, you absolutely are.
Yeah, no one who's gay is asking if they're bi enough. No one who's straight is asking if they're bi enough. If you're asking the question, it's a pretty good, like, oh yeah, it's a good litmus test.
Like
the pH level
I've actually got something to tell you. Yeah. Yeah. And if you're
the BuzzFeed test is saying yay.
Yeah. And oh gosh, that reminds me. There's a common thing in the bi community. You said this earlier. Saying, everyone's a bit bi. If you say that, I've got something to tell you. You're probably bi, because non-bi people don't actually think that.
Oh my gosh. I have a few specific people in my life who have said that to me. Everyone's a little bit bisexual. I'm like, bitch, I'm waiting for you to come to me one day and be like, listen, maybe I'm bisexual.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah. I was at an airport and someone said that, and the guy next to her just immediately went, "No, I'm gay. I'm definitely very gay." and then another person's like, "No, I'm straight," and I was just like, "Yeah, I'm the bi one in the room," and I used to think that.
That's great.
Let's talk whenever you want to.
Yeah.
No, I actually didn't do that, but
Well, hey, if you're listening along and you're looking for a bi community, a bi daddy, a bi zaddy, a bi thought, to be your, we've got them all. Please jump onto our website, join our bi community. We have a Facebook group that we are slowly adding new users into. You can join us there. If you're not into a community where people can see your name, maybe you're not out yet, you can join our newsletter where we keep you up to date with all new episodes, all new content, all new events, that kind of thing. But we would love to chat with you. If you want to send us an email, tell us about your bi experience. Maybe what did you do this week at work to be visible, in your social circle to be visible. We would love to hear your stories. It's amazing. We would also really, really, really love if you want to send us a video. We want to include that on the podcast. If you want to send us something about your bi experience, or you have a question.
Yeah, you might want to disclaimer that we've probably got thirsty listeners. Send us a topical. Oh God. No X-rated stuff, please. And that's
you can send whatever you deem appropriate to the Give It To Me By Instagram page. Hopefully we can save them in time that we can get them onto the podcast, because I know that Instagram is a bit funny. But please send them through to us. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to address any questions that you have about bisexuality, the lived experience, anything about bi plus conversation on the podcast. We'd love to feature you and honor you. This has been our third episode. We're very excited. Bi Visibility Month is coming up very shortly. We have a lot of fun bi visibility content coming up. So if you want to subscribe, leave a 5-star review or a 4-star spicy review. Don't leave the 1-star ones. Fuck off. Get out of here. We love you. Thank you so much. That's about it from me. Steve, do you have any final parting words for our delicious, delectable, delightful listeners today?
Yeah, woof.
Woof, I love that.
So, one of my things about this podcast, I always show people one of my little bi knickknacks. So what I want to see is everyone's little bi knickknacks. So while you're sending Chad on our shared Instagram at Give It To Me Bi, I want you to send me all of your bi nonsense.
Bi nonsense? That's cute. I love that.
Thank you. Just so that basically I can develop my own shopping list and just become absolutely the transformer of bisexuals, just weird crap all over me.
Is that it?
Totally.
That's great. I love that.